Hi, it's Dwyer. Heads up, I'm battling the hiccups. I'm going to try to work through it in this video. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. It is September 19th, 2025. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me talk on some things in the news. Just, you have to look at the future. They might relate to boxing. Some of the best interviews of Manny Pacquiao I've seen were actually done by Jimmy Kimmel. Kimmel has a sports history. You can tell Kimmel is one of these guys who is a sports fan. He's a boxing fan. Now, you have an interesting situation where Netflix, Reid Hoffman's outfit, right? And it's probably unlikely that Reid Hoffman disagreed with Kimmel's comments that got Kimmel suspended from his own show. Well, just to understand, Reid Hoffman, was one of the head honchos with Netflix. Folks, Netflix just pulled in 41 million viewers for Terence Crawford against Canelo, right? Understand that's actually down from the numbers pulled in by Jake Paul against Mike Tyson, right? Netflix has to realize that boxing, particularly big fights involving two guys who were undisputed in their past, right? Boxing involving a iconic heavyweight champion against a YouTuber who has taken the sport by storm. Right, folks? This is a huge opportunity for Netflix and other showers of sports to incorporate a Hollywood symbol with a lot of connections in the entertainment industry. Let me also say, too, that there were a group of celebrities you might have seen. Denzel Washington with a beard at some fights. Right? They're a group of celebrities that are into boxing. And I think Jimmy Kimmel in boxing, being part of Netflix's presentation, interviewing celebrities. Hollywood has a long history of people who were involved in the fight game, right? Mickey Rourke. People might know that, Mike Hunter's dad was sponsored by a group out of Los Angeles when he fought the bounty hunter. Let's just say Kimmel, I hope he considers boxing, right? The Zone, Netflix, they're not controlled by the same group of stations that got Kimmel suspended. I think that would be an interesting hookup if it happens. Let me also say, too, that I do believe that movies have never been better, right? But movie culture has been. In other words, there was a time where, you would see a long line of people outside a movie theater, and the show wasn't even opening that day, right? They would literally camp out. Movies meant that much. Now we have great movies on Netflix, Paramount, Peacock, you name it, right? HBO Max and stuff like that. The movies have gotten better. They're more adult. They deal with real themes, right? It's not all network TV fare. But the culture is different where the celebrities aren't what they once were. The acting's spectacular. You have some great actors who are as good as any I've seen, right? But they're not viewed as the icons that they were considered in the past, right? So, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, the reality is that both of their shows were hemorrhaging viewers. right? There's so many interviews of celebrities on YouTube. The celebrities themselves, some of them have their own, TikTok accounts and X accounts. If I want to interface with a celebrity, I could actually see what the celebrity's saying. I don't really have to wait for Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon to have the celebrity on the Tonight Show as I did in an earlier generation. Right? So I believe sports has a much bigger place in the world than it did when I was younger, right? You have many more sports leagues. You have entire cultures. The WNBA is fascinating to watch. The basketball is just part of the story, right? Sports is the ultimate reality TV. If I'm Jimmy Kimmel, I read the tea leaves. I see the turns the future's about to make. And I realize that, the future might be more away from network TV than on network TV. Let's talk about some other things. Terrence Crawford. Where does he go from here? I heard Eddie Hearn talking about, Jaron Ennis wanting a piece of him. I wonder if Crawford, and I consider Crawford a great fighter. Longtime viewers know that. But I wonder if Crawford could survive at 160. I'm just keeping it real. Right? I wonder what happens if Crawford fights a Diego Pacheco at 168. And you have a long guy who can move, who has a jab, and who has certain physical attributes that Crawford simply doesn't have. Right? So let me say this. I like when sports has icons. Earlier today, I was watching the World Track Championships, and they had Usain Bolt in the house, and they just flatly introduced him as the best ever. Right? They said, hey, here's the greatest. And you understood, okay, here are his times. They put up some of his times, and you realize, wow, this guy ran this time in 2011, and this time would still carry the day today. Right? I like that in boxing. The reality is that some of the great fighters, right? Bob Fitzsimmons, Jack Johnson, we'll go back that far, right? Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, some of the best fought too long. Right? We look at Ali, they're different eras. Right? Just understand how the Ali-Larry Holmes fight ended. And Holmes used to be Ali's sparring partner. Holmes, in fact, in an interview, said that there was a time where his family came to watch him spar with Ali, and that he was still upset because Ali, in front of his family, busted him up. Right? Ali was merciless. Ali didn't cut Larry Holmes any slack in front of his family. Holmes was upset with that. Well, understand how when they fought as professionals, how that fight ended. Angelo Dundee, the guy who helped Ali win fights. Right? Ali's glove suddenly gets cut and stuff like that. Dundee waves off the fight. Ali was finished. Right now in that sport, where Ray Robinson, after the Joey Maxim fight, comes back to the sport later and starts suffering losses and fights well into the 60s. Right? This is the guy who fought Henry Armstrong in the early part of the 1940s. Right? In that sport, you really want a guy who had a full career, right? Didn't retire early like Rocky Marciano did. You want a guy who had a full career, who leaves the sport on top and stays retired. Right now, I like the fact that Floyd Mayweather is unbeaten. I like the fact that Floyd is 50-0. It's an easy number to remember. Right? I like the fact that Terence Crawford is unbeaten. I like the fact that Crawford was undisputed in 3 weight classes. Right? I don't want, the Crawford fight that looks like Joe Louis against Rocky Marciano, where Louis gets knocked out of the ring. Right? I don't want the Crawford fight that is analogous to Antonio Tarver knocking out Roy Jones. Right? I don't want that fight. So I'm hoping that Crawford, who's playing it close to the vest, walks away from the sport here. Folks, he's in his late 30s. Right? He's been talking about Mean Machine. Understand, that was a tough fight. He had to get up off the canvas, whether the ref caught the knockdown or not. Right? For those keeping track, Crawford believes that Mean Machine hit harder than Canelo. Right? I have no doubt that there's some fighters out there that Crawford could beat who are world class. I have no doubt about that. But there's something special when you see a Joe Calzaghe. And you realize that after some of his biggest wins, and let's not kid ourselves, that Bernard Hopkins fight was tough. It was close. Calzaghe hit the canvas legitimately. Right? I like the fact that Calzaghe, with money on the table, keep in mind, Carl Froch was around. He could have fought Carl Froch. He could have pivoted and fought Andre Ward, Olympic gold medalist. He didn't. He walked away. He's unbeaten. Right? That's what I want for Terence Crawford. Right? So let's see what Crawford does. I saw in a Stephen A. Smith interview, Stephen A. asked him about Benavidez. I don't want to see Crawford in the ring with Benavidez. Too much risk involved. You understand that if it goes south, it could go south like that Louis Marciano fight went south. Right? So, I know these fighters are competitors. I know they don't know when to say when. Understand how determined some fighters are. Believe it or not, Hall of Famer Alexis Arguello visited with his former opponent, the Hawk, Aaron Pryor, in an effort to convince Pryor, who was practically blind in one eye at the time, not to go forward with an extra fight. Right? Understand, Joe Frazier, after losing to George Foreman twice, after the Thriller in Manila, he actually came back. Right? I understand. These retired fighters have a hard time sitting on the couch and watching fighters who they feel aren't as good as they were. I understand, too, the people around the fighter have a certain level of loyalty. So they aren't going to tell the guy, player, it's done. Your best is behind you. You're not only on the back nine, you're on the last couple of holes. You're where you should be. On the couch, with a soda, with some popcorn, watching the next generation. Right? I hope Terence Crawford figures it out. I hope he's just taking a victory lap here. Right? There'll always be that extra money out there for him. Right? Always. Boxing's an unforgiving sport. You only need one off night to destroy an unbeaten record. Let's talk about a fight where I picked the winner, The guy went out and won the fight convincingly. He was the favorite in the fight. He won the fight convincingly. He looked good doing it. There were some questions as to how he couldn't stop a opponent coming up in weight class who was not defensively blessed. Right, I'm talking about the Chris Eubank, Conor Benn first fight. Folks, these are the fights that get you in trouble. You look at film and Chris Eubank is better than Conor Benn. Right, Conor Benn's interesting. Right, he's a very good athlete. Very good athlete. You understand that there have been some PED suspicions surrounding him. Right now, Eubank, and I know people disagree with me, they remember the Eubank who fought Billy Joe Saunders, right? Eubank, his personality rubs people the wrong way. Right? But this guy has been one of the United Kingdom's best fighters for years. Right? And understand, the United Kingdom, at least over the last 10 years, has been a major boxing hotbed. Right? Some of the better fighters I've seen, even guys who aren't viewed as the very best. You have one of them fighting this weekend, Willie Hutchinson. Take a hard look at him. Right? Understand the UK has gotten so good that guys who British people don't consider to be the very best are actually world-class fighters who, on the right night, might be able to give the reigning champion all kinds of problems. Now let me say this, while I believe Chris Eubank is the better fighter, right? Eubank's the guy who can do a lot of things. Right? Eubank can keep you at the end of a jab. Eubank, if he wants, can take away your body. Eubank actually is excellent defensively. Eubank's only been down once in his career, the Liam Smith fight. And he's fought tough guys. Right? Eubank also is rare. He's all about status and money. He doesn't want the burden that comes with being the title holder. He doesn't want people knocking on his door and saying, hey, you have to fight your mandatory if you're going to keep our belt. Right? So it's interesting. Eubank at 160, long time. But yet, he's not pushing to fight Janabek, who's been a dominant champion. Folks, this is the textbook Marvin Hagler character. Right? If you know about Janabek, right, unless your name's Denzel Bentley, if you know about Janabek, you should be very afraid. This is a great fighter, and the public is just catching on. Understand what made Marvin Hagler. And this is a guy who went to England to beat Alan Minter for the belt. Right? It was when guys started coming up from a lower weight class, Thomas Hearns, Roberto Duran, that we suddenly realized the middleweight champ, Marquis Division, was a bad man. Right? It took Thomas Hearns coming out and throwing big shots and Hagler firing back. It took almost 3 rounds of mayhem for people to understand, this guy is one of the most exciting people in the sport. That's who Janabek is. Chris Eubank, who's been on the public stage for years, hasn't wanted to hop in the ring with him. Well, let me say this. Eubank concerns me. I openly concede. His skill level is much higher than Conor Benn's. Much higher. Here's the problem. Here's why, even though we got the first fight right, the second fight's unbettable. Right? His father, fighter, Chris Eubank. Right? The man who beat Nigel Benn. Chris Eubank was concerned about the Conor Benn matchup, right? Eubank Sr., because he felt that his son would be losing too much weight. There was a time where we were talking about the guys fighting at 157. Junior was willing to do so. Dad was upset. Right? Well, understand, they fought at 160. After the fight, Eubank, who's in his 30s, don't be fooled by Crawford, Canelo. Age matters. Eubank's in his 30s. Chris Eubank was severely dehydrated after the fight. Right? Somewhere along the line, while he was fighting a virtuoso fight, his body said, player, we're rebelling. Right? His body said, hey, player, we've been denied water long enough. Right? Eubank had severe dehydration problems after that fight. Folks, that takes him off my betting board. Right? You know, I can look at highlights. I can say, oh, this brother looked good here, didn't he? I can say, oh, man, this guy has all kind of skills. Wow, that Liam Smith rematch was a mismatch. I start hearing about a guy in his 30s having severe dehydration problems after a fight. And, of course, his fight against Conor Benn. And I understand Conor's coming up from a lower weight class. But the bottom line is the Eubank side of the ledger should have the leverage. Right? Eubank should be able to say, look, man, after my dehydration problems, I'm only going to fight you at 164. Isn't that the weight at which Canelo fought Julio Cesar Chavez Jr.? Right? One would imagine Eubank would have a justifiable reason for fans to say, hey, look, the first fight went the distance. It was a doozy. Eubank wants to come in weighing a little bit heavier because he was dehydrated. Let's be fair to the fighter. We don't want an older guy having punch resistance problems during a fight because he had to be dehydrated to make weight. Let me tell you how things really work. I know fans think, hey, once the guy makes weight, he's good. Right? The guy can rehydrate. What's the big deal? Folks, history tells us that guys who struggle to make weight are more prone to get hurt. Look at Gerald McClellan. Do the research on him ahead of the Nigel Benn fight. Right? So if someone stopped me on the street and said, Dwyer, who do you think's more skilled? Chris Eubank or Conor Benn? I'd say, oh, Chris Eubank. Right? If their next question is, hey, man, are you taking him in their rematch? I'm like, hell no. Right? Just imagine the end of Crawford-Canelo. If Canelo suffered dehydration problems at the end of that fight, then they announced the rematch, and the rematch is at 168. Right? You'd say, nah, man, I'm not picking Canelo here. Right? If a guy starts having problems in the middle of the fight, a lot can happen. Right? I don't think Eubank, I'm not convinced Eubank is healthy anymore at 160. Folks, you get older, your body gains weight. It takes a while to figure out that those last few pounds are the hardest to lose. It takes a while to figure out that if you lose weight past a certain point, while people are telling you, hey, player, you look good, right? You don't quite feel the same. You're not at your best. Right? To be at your best would take going up to another weight class. I always felt one of the big mistakes Roy Jones made was when he gained weight. And you and I know Roy Jones was only in the high 180s, maybe the low 190s. Right? Still, Boxing-wise, that's a far removed destination from 175. When Jones fought for the heavyweight championship, and he wins the heavyweight championship, right? I always thought Jones should have stuck around heavyweight, even if they stripped him. You know, the heavyweight division has heavyweight checks. You always have contenders in the heavyweight division, and Jones was just so damn fast that you thought, man, how are some of these bigger, clunkier guys ever going to find Roy in the ring? All Roy has to do is be episodic, right? Land some combinations, get out of dodge, have the big guy trying to keep up with him, right? Jones could have stayed at heavyweight if he wanted to continue his career. I would have retired after winning the heavyweight championship, but if he wanted to continue his career, he could have gotten some paydays. There's a weight class, too, called the cruiserweight division. Roy could have gone there and fought some guys. But when Roy lost the weight to get back to 175, isn't that when he started having problems? Stopped by Tarver. Stopped by Glenn Johnson. Let's not forget that fight. Right? So to me, we have to make tough calls here. Hey, life is unfair. Right? If Chris Eubank, after a fight against Benn, and no offense to Benn, but they're tougher opponents at 160 than Benn. Right? After a fight against Benn where Eubank couldn't get the stoppage. Right? The fact that Chris Eubank was dehydrated scares me away from betting on Chris Eubank in any further fight at 160. Let's go further. Now, Canelo has been diplomatic. I know the public disagrees with me. Great. You know, I don't have a problem being wrong. I've made several videos where after a fight I've said, man, I was wrong on this fight. I don't have a problem being wrong. I don't have a problem with the world disagreeing with me. Right? Understand, Canelo owes Turkey 2 more fights. That's the reality. Right? So, Canelo really can't have the attitude of, hey man, you know, I defended my title. Crawford didn't do enough to beat me. I thought I won this fight. He can't say that. Right? I know there are videos online of some esteemed boxing Hall of Famers. Right? I'll name 2. Oscar De La Hoya, who has a video gloating about how he picked Crawford in the fight. Right? Just understand, Oscar De La Hoya had a business relationship in the past with Canelo that didn't quite work out. Right? Let's just say the guys weren't on the warmest, friendliest of terms before this fight. Right? And of course you have Lennox Lewis, who's interesting. Right? Because Lewis was a heavyweight. Canelo isn't a threat to his legacy. Right? You know, and Lewis is wondering in a video here online about how the judges could have given Canelo 5 rounds. Right? Just understand, there was an AI judge, Ring Magazine's AI judge, that scored the fight even. Right? Just understand, I didn't give Canelo 5 rounds. I gave Canelo 7 rounds, including the first 5. Right? I know that's not the way many people see it. And I know, too, Abel Sanchez had Crawford winning. Floyd Mayweather, another esteemed Hall of Famer, bet $50,000 on Crawford. Right? Robert Garcia, predicted a Crawford victory, Crawford by decision. And after the fight, Garcia's unapologetic. Right? He believes Crawford won big. Right? Understand, I privately consider Abel Sanchez, Robert Garcia to be among the very best trainers in boxing. Right? So I know there are people who know boxing, Hall of Famers, people who bet on Crawford, who, believe that Crawford won the fight by a mile. Okay, great. Right? Good for them. Um, my view's a little bit different. I believe the public has gotten measured talk from Canelo, who, of course, is in the middle of a deal, not the end of a deal, and isn't completely free to talk candidly. Let me go one step further, too. Canelo is getting paid handsomely by Riyadh season. Right? So Canelo, doesn't want to say anything to jeopardize any business relationship that he has. The fight also was a commercial success. Canelo might privately feel that he might get a Crawford rematch, which I think would be bad for Canelo because of how the second half of the fight unfolded. Right? I had Canelo winning the fight, but I had Canelo losing badly the 11th and 12th rounds. Right? Terence Crawford is a technician. Right? He's a math guy. Let's just say once he figures you out, it's very hard to have success against him. So let me just raise this possibility. Let's say Chris Eubank beats Benn in the rematch. Right? I won't be betting on it, or if I do, I might be on the Benn side of the play. I might be swinging for the fences on it. Right? Not that I think Benn wins the fight, but Benn would certainly be the betting side of the play. Right? Because he's going for, a knockout. He is an excellent athlete. There's some familiarity. He should feel that he wasn't knocked out the first fight. Maybe that will, have him be even more aggressive in the rematch. Anything can happen. But if Eubank wins, I think Eubank would be the perfect next opponent for Canelo. Right? If I'm Canelo, I want to fight a popular fighter. Right now, in Canada, Christian Mbili is very popular. He's not a household name here in the United States. I'm not sure if he's a global name. Right? Skill-wise, Diego Pacheco is one of the absolute best at 168. There again, he's not a household name. Even worse than that, Pacheco probably gives Canelo problems. There's a height and reach dynamic. Pacheco is not just a puncher. He's actually a boxer puncher. There's a deeper problem for Canelo. Right? Pacheco is trained by David Benavidez' father. So you could imagine, right, that fight week would feature a lot of questions about Benavidez. And if I'm Canelo, I'm not fighting Benavidez. Right? So I believe the perfect opponent for Canelo's next fight is another guy in his 30s, Chris Eubank. Right? Eubank could rehydrate to 168. Understand, at Eubank's age, if he decides to fight somebody at 168 and he gains weight for that fight, he can't drop down. He can't drop back down to 160 ever again. That's just not the way the body works. Right? So Canelo, Eubank, in Riyadh or in the UK, folks, that's box office. Right? A lot of people, after Canelo lost 115, 113 on two of the judges' scorecards, a lot of people have been writing Canelo off. Right? This Canelo is past his prime argument has gotten too much life. So a lot of people will tune into that fight, particularly if Eubank looks good in the rematch against Benn. Right, folks? That would be an interesting fight because skill-wise, Eubank is one of the best in the sport, in my opinion. I'm not saying Eubank wins the fight. Right? But Eubank is skillful. Just like the Crawford match was a chess match, this fight would be a chess match. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Also, there's another wrinkle. Who is Eubank's trainer? The trainer who just beat Canelo, Bomac. Right? You could imagine a fight week for a fight involving Canelo and Chris Eubank, where future Hall of Famer, future first ballot Hall of Famer, Terrence Crawford is in the crowd, and where Bomac, who has other fighters, right? Lester Martinez was Bomac's fighter, the guy who just got a draw with top-rated Christian and Billy. Right? Fight week would be a great showcase for the Canelo-Bomac rivalry. Right? Not that they're direct rivals, but let's just say they've been on opposite sides of events. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let me close with this. I like watching old films. In my favorites folder right now, there are two guys talking about the Bob Fitzsimmons shift. It's actually riveting boxing talk. Check out my favorites folder. Now, I might be deluding myself, but I have a distinct memory of watching Henry Armstrong against Ray Robinson. Right? Now, maybe I'm just confused and lost and stuff. Right? I know who Henry Armstrong is. I know who Ray Robinson is. Right? I couldn't be that confused. Let me just say, if you have any film clips from that fight, please email them to me. In the past, people have emailed fights to me. Email them to me. I'd greatly appreciate it. Again, it's a past his prime Henry Armstrong. Armstrong was in his 30s. Armstrong's prime didn't last that long. Against an early 20s Ray Robinson. Right? And the folklore is that Ray Robinson was carrying his idol. Right? Which is a bit astonishing, since both of the guys are viewed as among the best ever to lace them up. If you have that fight film, forward it to me, please. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for stopping by.